Good evening, this is Quintus Curtius, and welcome back to Fortress of the Mind. And the subject of this podcast is going to be certain writers just speak to you. Certain writers just speak to you. And what I mean by that is that some writers you just feel that you have a connection with. You feel like they speak to you in a way, that their message resonates with you more than, say, some other writer. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And this subject came up from an email that I received from a guy who works at a company that I did a podcast about last year. A very, very interesting company. And I'll put the link on the post to this podcast so you can find it. But the name of the company is Delta 2 Alpha. Delta2alpha.com. That's DELTA, the number 2, ALPHA.com. And these guys are incredible. These guys are started their own knife manufacturing business. Two guys from Canada who had an interest in knives. And they just decided, without any prior experience, without really any design experience or experience in cutlery or edged weapons, they made the very, I think, is probably the best product in the field. You can find out all about their folding knives on their website, so I won't say too much about that, but it's a really interesting story. So that's a company that came to my mind again because I received an email from someone that works there. So I appreciated that. And let's go ahead and read the email first, and then we can talk about some of the details about it. And what he says here is this. All right, let's look at the email. He says, Quintus, I have gone through all your work, and I noticed that you have put a great emphasis and drawn much inspiration from Cicero, including translating 2 of his books. While you do reference other Stoic thinkers and frequently tell your readers to go beyond Stoic philosophy, you seem to have a favorite with Cicero. Other modern promoters of Stoic philosophy, and he puts in parentheses here, Ryan Holiday, Tim Ferriss, etc., have focused more on Seneca or Marcus Aurelius. I know this is a very open-ended question, but do you find more value in Cicero because of his consistency? Do you feel that Seneca, while a great ambassador for Stoic philosophy, was more a hypocrite with his vast wealth while preaching the practice of poverty? Do you find Marcus Aurelius to be too serious or somber or dry? Are you ever planning on doing a Quintus Curtius translation of Seneca or Marcus Aurelius's works? All right, well, this is a very good question, and I think the best way to answer this is to go into it in parts. All right, as a first principle, let me say that yes, I think it's true of anyone, whether modern writers, ancient writers, whatever. Certain authors, certain figures just speak to you. You just feel some sort of intimate kinship, some intimate connection across the ages in some way. And I would be lying if I said that I did not feel more of a kinship with Cicero than any other Roman writer. And I've thought about this a lot, and I think that probably the reasons are several. I think the first reason is that he was a real person. He was a flawed man, and he was a great man at the same time. And I think we can all relate to that, because if someone is too perfect, if someone is too pristine, it somehow makes him beyond reach to us. It makes him less accessible to us. But Cicero was a real person. He had, at the same time in his character, both good and bad traits. He could be an inspiring speaker, a man of great bravery, a man of action, a man of courage, and at the same time he could be petty, venal, vicious, short-sighted, narrow-minded, and foolish. And in many ways, I think that summarizes much of the human condition. No one is always perfect all the time. And I think we're more attracted to a man maybe for his faults as we are by his virtues. Because in these faults, we see the man revealed in all his inconsistencies, in all his complexities, and all of his durable virtue. which lasts through the ages. So Cicero was a real person, and I find that somehow inspiring in a way. Now, this is not to say that Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, any of the other Stoic thinkers were not genuine men. But it just so happens that my feelings with Cicero resonate more than with him than with the others. And maybe this is just an accident of chance. Maybe this is just an accident of chance, because the second thing about Cicero is that and I've commented on this before, we know more about him than almost any other figure, both in classical antiquity and really in the modern era. I mean, there's a huge body of private letters in his hand that have survived. I mean, there's more writings by Cicero than nearly any other Latin author, except maybe the really long ones like Livy, the historian Livy, Plinius Secundus, or Pliny. We have a huge volume of Latin texts that have come down to us from Cicero. And these letters, his letters to Atticus, his letters to his friends, reveal him in all of his vanity, all of his glory, all of his incredible eloquence. And I think this helps to humanize the man. And maybe another reason why I feel some sort of kinship with him is because he was also a lawyer. And that's the profession that I've devoted my life to. And you can see that when he does things, you can see the reason why he does it. You can see you can get the point of what he's trying to do. And if you read his works, his orations, his letters, his philosophical works, you get a very, very complete and full picture of what this man was like, in a way that you just don't get with Seneca or with Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. It just doesn't really round out the picture with the others. So those are some of the preliminary reasons why I've been somewhat attracted to Cicero. And like I've said in my writings, in my introductions to his translations that I've done in Stoic Paradoxes and On Duties, Cicero was an eclectic. I think the best way to describe him is he was an eclectic with strong Stoic tendencies. He never overtly identified himself as a Stoic, because as a lawyer, I think he always was willing to, or desirous of, hedging his bets. But it's pretty clear that of all the schools of philosophy, Epicureanism, Platonism, Aristotelianism, Stoicism, he found Stoic philosophy the one that was most attractive. And I think this is true of almost all of the upper class Romans, the educated Roman elite, the rulers. The Stoic philosophy meshed very well with their existing culture. It just did, in a way that some of the other philosophies did not. So those are the preliminary reasons. And I'm not the only one. The Renaissance the Renaissance humanists, when they began to rediscover some of these great works of classical antiquity, they wrote paeans of praise for Cicero. I mean, the influence that this guy exerted is tremendous. So those are some of the initial reasons. Some of the other reasons why I've found, I was originally led to translating two of his works, say more than Seneca's works, was simply just practical reasons. For the first problem with Seneca is that most of his work, and just so you know, I have all of Seneca's works in Latin. Actually, I have everything, even the obscure stuff. I have all of his letters, all of his essays, all of his plays, even the obscure work, Natural Questions, Questiones Naturales, which is a very interesting work. If you've never heard of it, it's an attempt to give a Stoic twist on the natural world. Very interesting book. But in any case, Seneca wrote a great deal, but the problem is that most of his works are very long. And when you're trying to make a translation and you want something that's going to be practical and digestible for the average reader, and something that's going to sell, frankly, you have to try to pick works that are at least are digestible for the average reader, and then hopefully they can use that as a springboard into further study. The problem with Seneca from a practical perspective is that his best work, in my opinion, are his letters. But the problem is they're very extensive. They're like 4 or 5 volumes. And really the only practical way to do that, to come up with a publication that can be produced, a translation that can be produced within a reasonable period of time, would be to try to take a selected letters. And I think if you're doing that, you're not really getting the integrity of the entire text. I mean, what someone really would need to do is to translate all of them, and that would just take a very long time. And who knows? Maybe when I'm 80 years old, I'll do it, or at some point I'll do that. But for practical considerations, for me, Cicero was more of a better choice for a couple of reasons. I first started out with Stoic Paradoxes, and what I liked about it was it's almost a totally unknown work. No one talks about it. No one's really ever heard of it, and I thought there was room there to make an impact in the field. There was room there. There were 2 ways to produce something significant in a field: either do something that no one else has done, that's one way, or do something in a way that's better than anyone else has done it before. I used the first method, I think, with Stoic Paradoxes because my translation is the only modern one that's out there. And I think I used the second method with On Duties because I consider my translation to be, for the general reader, the most accessible, readable, accurate, and I think practical translation that is available today in English. But what I like about Stoic Paradox is it distills in 6 points the main ethical tenets of Stoicism, and Seneca never does that. If you had to ask, in fact, I would challenge anyone, if you had to ask a lot of these guys that write about Stoicism or talk about it, okay, what are the main pillars? What are the main points of the Stoic creed? What you would get as an answer is a lot of helpless stammering. Help you manage pain, and okay, well, that's true, that's fine. But what's good about Stoic Paradox is it gives you a list. It gives you an actual specific list of what are the major ethical beliefs of Stoicism. It's a very short work. It's simply meant as an appetite whetter. And it's something that you can start out with and get a good grounding and then go on to other things. So it fills a niche. It fills a purpose in the literature. And for that reason, I felt like it was something that I wanted to do first. And I started out with that, and then I was led to On Duties, which has been a big success. And I've been actually just very, very shocked and happy with the success of On Duties, the constant positive feedback I'm getting from it. The sales are very good. And that was something that was a labor of love for me. I felt like this book, more than any other that he wrote, distilled his ethical and moral view of the universe. And I think if we can just try to incorporate at least some of those things into our life, I think we'll all be better men. So those are the reasons, to answer the question, why I was initially attracted to Cicero, maybe in preference to some of the others. But again, as I want to emphasize, I love Seneca. I have nothing against him. I will say that he strikes me as being a little more slithery and a little less genuine than Cicero. If you had to press me about that, I would say that to me as a personality, Cicero is someone that I could sit down with and have a cup of wine or a goblet of wine with in those days, I guess that would have been, and I could speak to him in his language about, hey, consul, How are you doing? What are you doing? Quid agis? How's life going? How are things going? And that's someone that I think has that perfect balance of, because, he was not really a patrician. He was not really an aristocrat. He was a man who came from a modest equitus background, a knight background. Seneca, though, was a patrician, which is nothing wrong with that. But there's just something about him that just rings a little too pat, a little too perfect, a little bit too smug. Again, I will say that Seneca is a great man. He's a great writer, and his books have been very much influential for me. So I'm not criticizing him. I don't want to get a lot of comments saying, "Oh, how can you say that? I can't believe you said this." I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying, it's like that old debate between, the Beatles and Elvis. You've got to pick one. You've got to pick one at some point. Now, Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius are also great, but translating one of them is really not an option for me because I don't know Greek. Even though Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, he wrote in Greek, which is interesting, isn't it? Actually, it's not very unusual. I mean, there were some educated Romans in those days who did like to show off their erudition and show off their mastery of Greek letters. And that was very common. A lot of the upper class Romans had Greek tutors or spent time in Athens studying. Cicero's own son spent time in a school in Athens, as anyone who has read the opening parts of On Duties knows. So Aurelius, now I've read his book in translation, and it's good. I mean, the Meditations, it's very good. It's a very, very good book. It's one of those foundational Stoic texts. But again, if I'm going to be, I put my heart and soul in my translations, and it wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to do anything with him because I don't know Greek. The languages, I do know a few languages, but Greek is not one of them. So, you have to stick with the things that you know about. But it's a great book, and even in translation, its wisdom and its applicability come across. But knowing the original language really enables you to convey it and translate it in such a way that you really feel it. And I'm working on another project right now, another translation project, which is going to be very big, and it should be done later in 2017, and I'll be looking forward to getting that out. But it takes time. These things take a good year and a half. If you want to do a good job, it takes a daily effort, and there just aren't many people who are willing. There just aren't many people who are willing to do that, or frankly, who are capable of doing that. They just can't. They can't do it. Cannot render it in such a way that the English is also just as fluid and erudite and sparkling as the original. So those are my points. And I hope I've answered the question. And as a final comment, you mentioned these two other guys, Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss. I don't know anything about these guys. I mean, I'm familiar with Tim Ferriss's work and his 4-Hour Workweek book. I think pretty much everybody's read that or is familiar with it, but I don't really know his opinions or what his views of Stoicism are, so I can't really comment on that. But I tell everybody, read as much as you can. Even if you find that one writer speaks to you or another one does not speak to you, don't just draw from one well. You should try to draw from several different wells. And even if a writer doesn't speak to you at one point in your life, put him back on the bookshelf, leave him alone, and then maybe come back to him in a year or two, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find something different. I've had that happen a few times. There have been books that I've looked at and I said, I can't stand this. This is just not, I'm not feeling it. And then, after maybe you've had a few life experiences that change your views or change your outlook on life, you have a very different perspective. And I had that experience recently with Herman Melville's book, The Confidence Man. The Confidence Man has been sitting on my bookshelf or sitting in storage for probably 15 years. And just now, or just recently, I revisited it, and it says a lot about human nature. It's a very dark story, but it has a lot of truth to it about con men, scammers, and there's a lot to be said there. So I hope that answers the question, and I'll say this podcast was brought to you courtesy of Delta2Alpha.com. Delta2Alpha.com, the greatest knife designers, knife manufacturers that I've seen out there, and I recommend anyone who's interested in edged weapons or knives to pay these guys' website a visit and take a look at what they've got. Again, I can't say enough good things about these guys. I really admire the fact that I've spoken to them. I've actually spoken to these guys personally on several occasions, and I really have a lot of respect how these guys had, professions in totally unrelated fields, and they still have those jobs, but they do this sort of as a labor of love, and I can relate to that. And in many ways, some of the best work in a field sometimes can come from outsiders. And I made a point of talking about this in one of my previous podcasts, Staying in Your Lane, about how people will try to tell you, you don't know enough about this, you shouldn't do that, or you have no right to talk about this or say that. Don't ever listen to anyone who says that. If you feel the passion for something, you put your product out there into the marketplace, and you let the marketplace decide. And people that try to give you Debbie Downer advice usually are coming from a perspective of jealousy or envy or stupidity. And you should never listen to people like that. So that's why I really respect the guys at Delta2Alpha.com. So check them out. That will conclude my podcast here tonight. This is Quintus Curtius. Good night.